Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be part and parcel of this discussion of national networks, data integration, et cetera. I'm very honored to be the director of the National Phenology Network. I work for U.S. Geological Survey, and I joined USGS in 2007 to essentially design, develop, and build, implement this national network. The numbers are a little bit different. We started out with $250,000 base stable support from U.S. Geological Survey and some resources from NSF RCN, and we built it up to about $500,000 base stable support, running at about $1 million a year with external resources, total of $10 million invested so far. Thank you. And what a challenge and what an opportunity to start a brand new national monitoring and science network in 2007 with essentially no resources. Jeff showed that model where you have top down with strong standardization or sort of bottoms up, more loosely organized, and I felt like we're really meet all the characteristics of the top down network framework, but I would call ourselves bottom up. So maybe it is very hybrid. So rather than discussing explicitly the successes, challenges, and lessons learned here, I think I'd like to try to weave them into my talk as I go forward. So what I'd like to do is to start out with why a national phenology network, and maybe just an introduction to some of the applications of how you might use phenological data. I'd like to then shift into the context that we've sort of recently come to as we struggled with, should we try and answer one grand challenge question for phenology, or should we be providing a new data resource for multiple uses and reuse by a variety of different users and stakeholders? We've come to this idea of building capacity for a national network where it can bring people together. It has 4 key components to it, and without them I don't think you could really have a national network with a standardized set of protocols, database, a user interface we call Nature's Notebook for data in, data out, data products. And then I'd like to give a couple of case study collaborations. I'm saying we're building a network by providing capacity, and I'll give two case studies. One where we're working with Fish and Wildlife Service in the National Wildlife Refuge System, and remember we are USGS funded, and so we have to be very careful to provide resources and capacity back to our natural resource manager organizations, and then also the LTAR working closely with the site out at the Jornada with the ARS. So 2 quick examples there. So rather than kind of go into too much detail on the Phenology Network, hopefully most of you have heard a little bit about it. Essentially our mission is to serve science and society by collecting, organizing, and distributing phenological information and ancillary information to a decision-making and adaptation in variable climates and changing environments. I put the changing environments in there because you don't have to have climate change as a driver for this network. You can use it to understand where to go to see leaves in the fall, for example. We have a very diverse set of stakeholders, research scientists, natural resource managers, et cetera. You might use phenological information to understand the probability of large fires in the western U.S. You might use phenological information to understand patterns of pollen production and allergies in the American public, or you might use it, as we've heard already, to understand changes in carbon dynamics on a continental scale. This is the generalized structure that was envisioned for the Phenology Network when we started out. The idea was to have a set of intensive science sites like ARS and NEON, the ones we've just heard about, where there's process-based research going on. We also have a set of extensive observation sites, and you probably recognize this triangle from CENRS from long ago. It's been around for a long time. Extensive observation sites create a wall-to-wall infrastructure, more than the 60 sites or so of NEON, instead actually spreading out to 10,000 sites across the nation. We can do this by bringing in volunteer and education networks like eBird, which was mentioned by Sally Jewell in her talk during lunch, and then stitch it all together with remote sensing to create a wall-to-wall framework. Well, here's one example of how we're starting to use the data. Essentially, we're taking raw data that come in across the nation and converting it into derived data products. You've heard a lot about that. Very, very similar. We have lots of graphs, Deb, that look just like yours. And in fact, I'll show one in a moment. And we work towards creating data products, and this is our first national data product, basically an index of spring that was developed by Mark Schwartz at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And he's moved the data and the curation of the index over to us. We're working with Toby Alt and others to create this, and essentially this shows the onset of spring across the continental United States from early January through May, and so each time a pixel changes color, essentially spring starts according to the spring index, and I'll talk more about that later. It will be an indicator in the new National Climate Assessment National Indicator System that will be daylighted next spring. So we're very, very happy about that. So how do you build capacity for something like a new national network that starts in 2007 with just very scarce resources? At first, we thought we could just go out to the public and other networks and groups that were doing phenology monitoring, because there's a lot of them out there, and say, hey, come on, y'all come be under our umbrella. There was some uncertainty about that, and so instead what we did is we ended up providing the capacity, and then people come in from a grassroots way to collaborate with us. So if we start from the bottom, it's all keys on standard protocols, and of course we've heard that many times here before, where we spent the last 5 years essentially developing, vetting, and publishing protocols. I'll talk about each of these four elements here in more detail in just a moment. We've built an online user interface we call Nature's Notebook. It used to be the National Phenology Network Phenology Observation Program or System, and nobody understood, and people still don't understand what phenology is, so we have to overcome that. We've built a National Phenology Database, also very complicated. It's ecological data, 53 tables in our database, and then we produce standardized data products. We work with other collaborating organizations like Fish and Wildlife Service or Park Service, who use Nature's Notebook, or NEON or ARS, who don't use Nature's Notebook, but they use the standard protocols, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So going back to the bottom then of my graph, and I'm going to shoot from the bottom up, we start with standardized protocols. Well, what am I talking about when we talk about standardized protocols, and how do you really create those? For phenology monitoring, we're focusing on in-situ monitoring of organisms at their location at a given time. Therefore, it's very organismally based. We're asking people to track the status of them, i.e. the presence or absence of a particular phenological phase, like leaf out or flowering or migration or reproduction. And we can also ask them to estimate what is the abundance or the intensity of those phenophases. So you can actually get nice ecological data. Again, very, very complicated ecological data. So we've published all that in the form of standardized protocols, broadly vetted, and then published in an international journal of biometeorology. Just recently, there's 74 different phenological functional types that are published. We're documenting the versions as things do change through time. We're developing crosswalks so that we can integrate our data back over to other networks. I'll talk about that more in a few minutes, such as BBCH in Europe. And right now we have protocols for around 945 species. Again, if you're providing capacity, people want to be able to have their species, be able to monitor their species on their site. And unfortunately, there's no single plant or animal that lives across the entire US, essentially. And also, we share this information via web services. So going up to the next tier, data input, output, you have to have an interface for people to be able to participate in that. We call it Nature's Notebook. It's a ground-based or in-situ multi-taxa national scale observing system, uses those standard protocols. We have web and mobile apps and the different platforms. We have about 100 partner organizations that are actually collecting phenological information using our protocols and using Nature's Notebook and adding data into the database. There's a total of around 4,300 active observers across the nation at 6,800 sites. We run local to national campaigns asking people to help collect data, and there have been about 10 data pubs that have come off this data set since which we initiated Nature's Notebook in 2009. It's hard to show a picture of a database. They're really quite boring, with all due respect to my IT coordinator back there. So I'll just show you how to go get the data. We have, this is the URL for going to get the data, the metadata, the documentation are all freely available. We realized that we really couldn't move forward without really, really good terms of use, because we have so many partners who are collecting data in so many ways. So you can go here, get the data. You can get it either raw, or you can get it summarized. We have extensive documentation for QA, QC. We're starting to implement QC, automated QC tools. You can get the terms of use, data attribution, et cetera. So really, I totally agree with the speakers before that you can't really do much unless you can have open terms of use and open access to data. We have a data dashboard, so you can track what's going on, and again, documented QA and QC. Now at the top of that column, data products. So what are we trying to produce? What are we trying to create that take this raw data, presence, absence of a phenophase? Do you see a leaf on your red maple in your backyard? Yes or no? And convert that into derived data products. So we have phenological status data that we're converting into what we call phenometrics, onset, end, duration, peak, et cetera. These metrics is how you might describe an organism at a single organism at a site. We can add some across species, some across sites, et cetera. So we're still working on that. Couple it with climatological data to create what we call phenoclimatic models, like the spring index I showed a few minutes ago, which links meteorological data sets with phenological data sets. And once we do that for the spring index, which is built off of lilacs and honeysuckles, we can essentially do that for any other species for which we have sufficient phenological information and understanding. We can then do neat things with it, like create a species sensitivity database to look for changes in synchrony among organisms. We can create gridded maps and data sets that allow us to hindcast back to 1900, as long as we have meteorological data, do nowcasting, what's going on right now and in the near future, and then projections out to 2080. But really where we're going to earn our dollar is in short-term forecasts. Forecast the onset of spring or the onset of phenological activity by species at a given location. So strong spatiotemporal, very fine granularity, where we can do it 10 days forward using numerical weather forecasts. We know where organisms are. Essentially, we're collecting data and distributing it in real time, and we can look to a forecast, bring it in through a web service, and tell you whether or not you're going to have onset of leafing in, say, a maple forest. But the real icing on the cake will be the longer term, 1 to 3 month forecasts of the onset of spring and phenological phases once we get a handle on large scale atmospheric circulation patterns and how they affect pools of moisture and temperature on a national scale. So that's what we're working towards, and we're already making a little bit of progress. So we're dependent upon the climatologists, some of you might be in the room, to really kind of hammer out some of the relationships between, say, PDO, NAO, et cetera, and projections at relatively tight spatial scales. So what I've just done is describe the kind of the core capacity in a way. This is what we are. This is what we do. Now I'll just use a few slides, 3 slides and a slide here to describe briefly how we go about bringing in other partners who are wanting to build on our capacity and thus creating a network. That way, I'll start with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Fish and Wildlife Service has actually provided some resources to us in an interagency agreement to create a landing page and in a format friendly to the Fish and Wildlife Service, in particular the refuge system, where you can go to the website. We host the page for them. We built it with them. And if you're a resource manager, you have resource management friendly information here, like strategic habitat conservation or adaptive management. What is phenology? How are the refuges getting involved? Who's doing what, et cetera. This is an example of where we're actually implementing that in the field. This is at Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge. It's the first urban wildlife refuge in the southwestern U.S. Over just actually in the town of Albuquerque was an old dairy farm, very important cultural spot, but this is the matrix of federal lands up and down the middle Rio Grande Valley in Albuquerque here. And what they're interested in doing is using our phenology framework, phenology monitoring framework, to place their refuge into a landscape scale context. They're interested in ecosystem restoration. They need to convert the fields. They're going to leave some of it open, but they're right underneath the flyaway for Albuquerque Airport. And they have been told no net increase in birds. So they need to know where are the birds, when are they there, how many are there, so they can comply with that. They're interested in those population dynamics, species interactions on the refuges. Ecosystem services is a big watchword in the federal government right now. And also they want to do stakeholder engagement. So they can use Nature's Notebook to do that. Here's an example of a product that we've developed for them. This is just the phenology of birds from January through December. They're at BDO. They just started monitoring in January. It's a brand new refuge, a variety of different taxa, and these are just showing the incidence or the presence of these organisms on this, so it's kind of like a phenological calendar. Now to talk about how you may not want to use Nature's Notebook for some reason. You'd rather manage your information data collection process yourself, manage the data yourself, and then perhaps share it back to the National Phenology Database via APIs or web services. And that would be a great example we have going on with NEON. NEON is using our plant phenology monitoring protocols for the implementation of plant phenology monitoring across the NEON infrastructure, but they are not using Nature's Notebook, but they are using our standard protocols that we can deliver to them via APIs. I will, though, give an example for ARS, because we're in an LTAR session, or one that's focused on the capacity for LTAR, and show you how we've been working with Don Browning and others at the Jornada site to essentially collect phenological information across a variety of different spatial and temporal scales, from phenology cameras to field observations. This is 2012 through 2014, and you can see here the different granularity and the frequency at which you can get information at these different scales. They're using unmanned aerial vehicles, and here's a couple of images during these times of year, Landsat and MODIS imagery. And so what they're interested therein is understanding patterns of phenology on the landscape scale, perhaps to inform something like Restore New Mexico, where we're looking at patterns in the phenology of mesquite that greens up irregardless of precip, or, say, grama grass. My last slide, as my lights go off here. So networking the networks, just how do we sort of pull all this together? Essentially, in a way, perhaps this was an advertisement, but there are great opportunities to partner if others are interested in partnering with an existing national network like this. You can plug in a number of different ways. You can leverage on our existing partners and our observer core, our army of observers. You can pull down standardized protocols that will facilitate that data integration and interoperability. We will produce value-added tools and products. We can collaborate with you on that, and then we can communicate those joint products. We can co-brand products and deliver them to the various stakeholders, and we can also provide custom content to some of our partners who are interested in participating. So really, we're creating a great opportunity here to link up, for example, with LTAR and perhaps your national experiment or other networks that are out there that want to try to understand how the biological diversity and spatial-temporal variation interact with climate to answer particular science or applied questions. Thank you.